You probably think Clint Eastwood is that cool, calm guy who never gets upset, right? Well, guess what? You're wrong. At 95 years old, this movie legend finally let everyone see a different side of him. A darker side that nobody expected. He's talking about 6 famous actors who turned their backs on him when he really needed friends. These stars worked with him, became successful with him, and then hurt him badly. Once you know their names, you'll totally get why Clint Eastwood decided to never forgive them and never forget what they did. Number 1. Leonardo DiCaprio, the golden boy who made Clint walk. Away, what could make Clint Eastwood actually leave his own movie while they were filming? The answer is Leonardo DiCaprio. When they started making a movie called J. Edgar back in 2010, everyone thought it would be amazing. You had Hollywood's most relaxed and chill director working with one of the most serious actors ever. But people who were there say it turned into a really bad situation. Nobody expected it. Right from the very first day, DiCaprio walked in carrying big folders full of notes. He had pages and pages of stuff he researched about history. He even brought copies of real FBI documents with his own notes written all over them. The people working on the movie said Clint's patience started running out super fast. One time, Clint joked and said, "He came in acting like a detective trying to solve a mystery, and I wasn't the mystery he needed to solve." It sounded funny, but Clint was actually getting really annoyed, and that feeling kept getting worse and worse. Then something happened that broke everything. There was this big emotional scene where Leo's character has a complete breakdown. Leo did the scene perfectly on the very first try. It was so real, so powerful, so totally flawless that everyone in the room just froze. They couldn't believe how good it was. Clint quietly said, "Perfect. Cut. Let's move on." But Leo said he wanted to do it again, and then again, and then again. By the time they did it for the 6th time, Clint wasn't even standing behind the camera anymore. He was leaning against the table where they keep the snacks and drinks. He was holding a cup of coffee, and his face looked like stone. Someone asked him if everything was okay. Clint just mumbled, "He's still trying to find something that I already found 5 takes ago." When they finally finished filming the whole movie, there was just this really awkward silence between them. The kind of silence that Clint is famous for. After that movie, whenever they had meetings to pick actors for new films, something interesting would happen. Someone would suggest DiCaprio's name. Clint would just shake his head no. He'd say, "He's a great actor for sure, but he's not my kind of actor." They never worked together again after that. They never stood on the same stage together. They haven't even talked to each other since that movie ended. Leo ended up winning an Oscar a few years later for a different movie. But he never got another phone call from Clint Eastwood ever again. Why? Because in Clint's mind, being perfect isn't about doing something over and over until you get it right. It's about nailing it on the first try and not wasting even one more second. Number 2. Michael Moore, the man who went way too far. The exact moment when Michael Moore compared Clint Eastwood's movie American Sniper to movies that Nazis made? That was the moment he basically destroyed any chance of them ever being friends. Clint didn't scream. He didn't yell. He just decided right there to ignore Michael Moore forever and ever. But this wasn't the first time they clashed with each other. The bad feelings between them had been building up since way back in 2005. Clint was standing on a stage at a big awards ceremony called the National Board of Review Awards. He looked serious and said in his tough voice, "If Michael Moore ever shows up at my front door with a camera, I'll kill him." Some people in the audience laughed nervously because they thought maybe he was joking. But Clint didn't laugh at all. He just stared straight ahead at nothing, then turned around and walked off the stage. That wasn't supposed to be funny. That was Clint drawing a line and saying, "Don't cross this. If you want to understand why they hate each other, you need to know what matters to Clint." He believes in discipline. He believes in serving quietly without complaining. He believes in old-fashioned honor and doing the right thing. Michael Moore makes documentary films, and one of his most famous ones was called Fahrenheit 9/11. To Clint, that movie and others like it felt like Moore was just showing off, like he was hiding his political opinions and pretending they were art. Clint once had a rare moment where he got angry and told a friend, "He thinks soldiers are just pieces in a game. I think they're heroes." It was all about respect for Clint. Always about respect. Then, almost 10 years later, Moore made fun of American Sniper on the internet. He wrote that the movie reminded him of a Nazi sniper shown in another movie called Inglourious Bastards. Later, Moore said he was just making a joke and people shouldn't take it seriously. But people close to Clint said he was absolutely furious. One person who had worked with Clint for many years explained, "He doesn't forget when someone insults him. He just erases them from his life completely." And that's exactly what he did to Moore. Ever since Moore wrote that tweet on the internet, his name completely disappeared from Clint's world. Eastwood has worked with people who have all different kinds of political beliefs, liberals and conservatives both. But he won't work with anyone who makes fun of soldiers. To him, Moore didn't just cross that line. Moore jumped over it and spit on it. These days, if you mention Michael Moore's name when you're around Clint, the whole conversation just stops. He won't talk about it at all. Number 3. Barbra Streisand, the perfectionist who made the cowboy. Angry, if there's one name that makes Clint Eastwood's jaw get tight and his teeth clench together, even after being in Hollywood for 90 years, it's Barbra Streisand. She's the person who got so deep under his skin that he still won't even say her name out loud during interviews. Their feud, or big fight, became one of the coldest wars in all of Hollywood. It all started in the early 1980s, when both of them were changing from just being actors to also being directors who make movies. Streisand was known as the Queen of Control. She would do 40 takes of the same scene, sometimes 50 takes, sometimes even 60 takes, just to capture one tiny facial expression perfectly. Clint worked in the completely opposite way. He did 2 takes maximum, then said, "Okay, we're done. Let's move on to the next scene." People heard him say many times, "If it's not real and natural the first time you do it, then it's not even worth filming at all." To Clint, Barbra represented everything that was wrong with the new Hollywood. Too much control, too much vanity and caring about looks, and way too much overthinking every little detail. By the time the early 1990s came around, their completely different ways of making movies had turned into open hatred. When Barbra made a movie called The Prince of Tides, she didn't get nominated for Best Director at the Oscars in 1992. People overheard Eastwood telling a friend, maybe if she made her decisions faster, she'd be able to finish more than 3 films in 15 whole years. That comment spread through Hollywood like a wildfire. Everyone was talking about it. Then came the movie that broke whatever tiny piece of respect was left between them. The Bridges of Madison County. Streisand had originally been connected to the project to direct it herself, but she dropped out after spending years and years not being able to make up her mind about what to do. Eastwood swooped right in like a hawk, rewrote the whole script, and made a quiet, beautiful, emotional movie that everyone loved. It won Meryl Streep an Oscar nomination, and it gave Clint his revenge without him having to say even one word. Since that movie, they've avoided each other completely and totally. They act like the other person doesn't even exist. For Clint, Barbra became the perfect symbol of everything he hated about making films: hesitation, too much control, and killing the natural instinct that makes movies good. In Clint's code of how to live, you pull the trigger on a gun once, not 50 times. Number 4. Tommy Lee Jones, the alpha male that Clint couldn't control on. The very first day that Tommy Lee Jones walked onto the set of a movie called In the Line of Fire in 1993, Clint Eastwood supposedly leaned over close to someone working on the crew. He whispered, "This is like putting two big, tough bulls in one small pen together. This won't last very long." And guess what? Clint was totally right. At first, everybody thought they'd be absolutely perfect working together. Two tough guys making a tough movie. But behind the camera, where the audience couldn't see, it was like a cowboy duel. Jones wasn't the type of person who would just take quiet directions from a director. He would bark orders back, argue about things, rewrite his own lines to say something different, and he'd keep acting and performing even way after Clint yelled, "Cut." Clint, who always ran his movie sets calmly, efficiently, and silently without drama, just watched all this happening in total disbelief. One technician who worked there remembered Tommy Lee would stay completely in character, even between takes when the cameras weren't rolling. Clint would just stare at him with this look like, "What in the world are you doing?" The tension got to its worst point during a big heated confrontation scene where the characters fight. Jones stood really tall over Clint, staying fully in character, spitting out every single line with poison and venom in his voice. The director yelled, "Cut! Stop!" But Jones just kept going and going, staring straight into Eastwood's eyes without blinking. Everyone working on the crew froze like statues. They didn't know what to do. After a really long, uncomfortable pause, Clint whispered quietly to his assistant, "Life's way too short for me to deal with that kind of theater drama." Then he turned around and walked right off the set. From that exact moment, the decision was made in Clint's mind. Later on, when the people in charge of casting actors would suggest Tommy Lee Jones for Eastwood's future movie projects, Clint didn't even hesitate for 1 second. He'd say, "He's a great actor, no doubt about that, but we don't speak the same language at all." What he really meant was, never again. Not happening! They've never worked together again after that. They never shared a panel at an event. They've never even mentioned each other's names in interviews with reporters. In Eastwood's eyes, there's only room for one alpha male, one top dog, one boss, and he's the one who gets to yell, "Cut." Number 5. Richard Burton, the drunk who pushed Clint's patience to the breaking point. Clint Eastwood doesn't lose his temper easily. He's famous for staying calm. But Richard Burton came dangerously close to making Clint explode with anger. On the set of a 1968 movie called Where Eagles Dare, the tension wasn't about big egos or who was more famous. It was about work ethic, about how hard you work, and whether you do your job right. Burton kept showing up late to work. When he finally got there, he would slur his lines like his mouth wasn't working right. Sometimes he smelled like alcohol from partying the night before. Clint, who was already dressed in his costume and totally ready to work at dawn when the sun came up, just stood there, watching Burton stumble and mess up take after take after take. One crew member swore that you could actually see the respect draining out of Clint's face, like water pouring out of a bucket. Burton was in the middle of his wild, stormy marriage to Elizabeth Taylor at that time. Every night seemed to end with him at a bar drinking, and every morning the whole crew had to pay the price for it. Clint didn't yell at him or give him lectures about being professional. He just waited, cold, silent, and getting more and more disgusted every single day. After Burton completely blew the same exact line for the 10th time in a row, Clint supposedly muttered loud enough for people to hear, "I'm getting paid by the picture, not by the hour, so this doesn't bother me." The crew laughed nervously because the joke was pretty funny, but Burton didn't laugh at all. He got the message loud and clear. The final straw that broke everything came when Burton was overheard telling someone that this movie was just a paycheck job, meaning he was only doing it for the money and didn't care about it. To Eastwood, that was like getting slapped in the face. He believed that every single film deserved your full commitment and your best effort, even if it was just an action movie about fighting and explosions. Years later, when someone asked Clint about Richard Burton, he didn't even bother making it sound nice. He just said, "Talented guy." Wasted talent. That was all he said about Burton. That was all he ever needed to say. The film ended up becoming a big hit that lots of people went to see. But their relationship died right there on that set. Clint never worked with Burton again after that movie. He never spoke about him again. For a man like Clint, who believes that silence is the sharpest weapon you can use against someone, Burton's fate was sealed. What Burton did was, in Clint's eyes, completely unforgivable. Number 6. Jean Seberg, the woman who finally broke. Clint's patience, Clint Eastwood, doesn't talk about a movie called Paint Your Wagon anymore. And if you ask him why he won't discuss it, the answer is Jean Seberg. She wasn't just the actress who worked alongside him in this 1969 musical movie. She was the actual reason he promised himself he would never mix sympathy and feeling sorry for people with work ever again. Seberg was fragile, like she could break easily. She was unpredictable. You never knew what she'd do next. And she was already being watched carefully by the FBI, which is like the government's police, because of her political activism and the causes she supported. On the movie set, her emotions were all over the place. One day, she'd charm everyone working on the crew with a beautiful smile and be super nice. The next day, she'd lock herself inside her trailer for hours and hours, and nobody could get her to come out. Clint was the exact opposite kind of person. He was focused like a laser beam. He showed up on time every single time. He was allergic to drama, meaning he hated it and wanted nothing to do with it. By the third week of filming, he'd had enough. He was done. A script supervisor, which is a person who keeps track of everything in the movie, remembered this. She'd stop right in the middle of a scene to ask deep questions about her character's motivation, like why her character wanted to do something. Clint would just stare at the floor, waiting and waiting for her to finish talking. You could literally see him dying inside. The real bad blood and fallout came later, after they finished the movie. Paint Your Wagon bombed at the box office, which means barely anyone went to see it, and it lost tons of money. Seberg told newspaper reporters that Clint's wooden, stiff performance dragged the whole movie down and ruined it. To Clint, that was the worst kind of betrayal you could do to someone. She criticized a colleague publicly in newspapers after he'd spent months and months trying his absolute hardest to hold the production together and make it work. From that exact moment, she was done in his mind. He never mentioned her name again. If anyone ever brought her up in conversation, Clint would immediately change the subject, light up a cigar, and walk away from them. Years later, when news broke and spread everywhere about Seberg's tragic, sad death in 1979, Clint stayed completely silent. He didn't say one word publicly. Friends who knew him said he looked genuinely sad when he heard the news, but he never softened his feelings about her. One time, he said quietly, almost in a whisper, "Some people just aren't cut out for this kind of work, and I don't need to deal with it twice in my lifetime." That's as close as Clint Eastwood has ever come to forgiving Jean Seberg. So, what do you think about all of this? Was Clint Eastwood right to cut these 6 stars completely out of his life forever? Or did his cold silence go way too far? Tell us what you honestly believe down in the comments section below. We want to hear your thoughts.